Ms. Pearson, you can go ahead, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Monica Kaufman Pearson, your moderator for tonight, and I'm also a supporter of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated. Welcome to this critical conversation that affects the nation. This event is hosted by the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated, the Links Incorporated, and the Black Women's Agenda Incorporated. Our theme for this evening, For the People Act, our civil rights require our attention. I'm honored to introduce one of our co-hosts for the evening, NCBW Immediate Past National President, Virginia W. Harris. Good evening, Virginia.
Good evening. It is my honor to bring greetings on behalf of our national president. Good evening. Thank you, Monica. It is my honor to bring greetings on behalf of our national president, Elizabeth A. Jones, and all of the activist women in our 62 chapters in 27 states that comprise the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated. NCBW was founded in 1981 in New York City and is a 40-year-old advocacy organization whose vision is that Black women and girls will live in a world where socioeconomic inequality does not exist. 2020 was a record and groundbreaking year for the people. We proved that our voices mattered and that we alone have the power to change a nation. A record-breaking number of citizens showed up at the polls last year in order to cast their vote and truly make a difference in politics. This is why our vote is important. Our vote is not to be tampered with. Our vote is not to be threatened. Our vote is not to be questioned. Our vote is our voice. It is not a privilege, but a right, and we must continue to advocate for it. The For the People Act was created to ensure that our vote is a part of our civil liberties. This act protects our voices as citizens in this nation. And as an advocacy organization, we take pride in advocating on behalf of Black women and girls, especially on a legislative scale. We should never allow our voices to be silent. Continuing to use our vote and our voices collectively allows us to make a noise so powerful that no one can deny it. Today, I hope you walk away from this conversation feeling educated and empowered.
Thank you so very much, Virginia, for entrusting me with this evening and telling us why we're here. The For the People Act is for all the people. And tonight, our stakeholders will participate in the questioning of our guest speaker. Our co-hosts this evening are Dr. Kimberly Jeffries Leonard, Links Incorporated, Gwen Catchings Hess, the Black Women's Agenda Incorporated. Our other interviewers are Susan L. Taylor, founder and CEO, National Cares Mentoring Movement. Attorney Janice Mathis, Executive Director, National Council of Negro Women. Melanie Campbell, President CEO, the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation. And Leslie Hill, Manager, Public Affairs, Symetra Life Insurance Company. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here tonight. To introduce our guest speaker here again is immediate past national president of NCBW, Virginia Harris. Her introduction will be followed by a video, and then we'll hear from the United States Senator from Georgia, the Reverend Raphael G. Warnock, Virginia.
Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock grew up in Caton Home Public Housing in Savannah. Born one of 12 brothers and sisters, raised in coastal Georgia. His father, a veteran, small businessman, and preacher, grew up in Burke and Severn County, Georgia. Senator Reverend Warnock mother grew up in Waycross, Georgia, where she spent summers picking tobacco and cotton. A graduate of Savannah Saul C. Johnson High School, Senator Raphael Warnock's mother and extended family still lives in the Savannah area. Senator Warnock is a proud graduate of Morehouse College. After graduating from Morehouse, he went on to earn a PhD and began his career ordained in the ministry. For over 15 years, Senator Warnock has served as senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, the former pulpit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He is the youngest pastor selected to serve in that leadership role at the historical church. Senator Warnock was elected as a Democrat to the United States Senate on January 5th, 2021, a special election runoff for the term ending January 3rd, 2023, to fill the vacancy caused by the resignation of Johnny Isaacson, a seat previously held by appointed Senator Loeffler. He took the oath of office on January 20th, 2021. Please join me in welcoming my pastor and my friend, the Honorable Senator Raphael G. Warnock.
We must vote for the people we now call essential workers, but we don't pay them an essential wage. We don't provide for them essential benefits. We must vote for our seniors who have to choose between buying food and buying prescription drugs. We must vote for all of our children because none of our children are safe until all of our children are safe. We must vote because your vote is your voice and your voice is your human dignity. We must vote because a vote is a kind of prayer about the kind of world that you want to live in, and prayer is stronger when we pray together. So vote together and pray together and stay together and struggle together and work together, and together we win. God bless you, Georgia. God bless America.
Well, now it's time for our esteemed senator to speak. Senator, I guess we're going to start off by asking you immediately, what are the details of this act and why is it critical to those of us of color and all people who vote?
Well, first of all, let me say how deeply honored I am to be here with the National Coalition for 100 Black Women. Listen, I'm a pastor, first of all, in the Black Baptist Church. So I know that nothing happens without the sisters who are on this call. So thank you. It's great to be here with the coalition one more time, and wonderful to be here with the legendary, iconic Monica Pearson. Listen, folks, we've got work to do. We've got to pass both of these voting rights bills. I want to be clear about that. Our democracy is in a 911 emergency. There is an outright, unabashed, unapologetic assault on voting rights in our country. There are those who have seen our power, your power, and they are intent on making sure that you cannot exercise your power, that you don't get to decide who the president of the United States will be. That's what January 5th was all about. January 6th was all about. So we've got to pass both of these voting rights laws. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And here's how to think about it. What's in those two bills? I can summarize it at a high level just to kind of boil it down to its essence. The Freedom to Vote Act is about putting the fire out. There are folks who are literally trying to set the house of democracy on fire. We saw it in a very violent assault on the Capitol on January 5th. But since then, those fires have spread to state legislatures, state capitals all across the country. Some 400 voter suppression bills introduced in 49 states, more than 30 voter suppression laws passed, including the terrible one in Georgia called SB 202. And so I and others got in the same room this past summer when the For the People Act was blocked, and the Republicans blocked our ability to even have a debate on voting rights. We wrote something called the Freedom to Vote Act. It puts the fire out. It ensures that people have access to the ballot. It ensures that we have 15 days of early voting, that we have weekend voting, that voting happens on a federal holiday. It ensures that while states can have voter ID laws, we don't allow them to play with voter ID laws, to use voter identification as a means of suppressing certain parts of the electorate. So we provided minimal standards that ensure that every American has access to the polls. We've got to put the fire out. There are those provisions like the one in Georgia that would literally allow partisan actors at the state level to nullify the election, to swoop in into counties that they don't like politically and just take over the election. Basically, to have democracy turned on its head so that rather than the people picking their politicians, the politicians get to pick their people. And so we got to put the fire out. And that's what that's what the For the People, that's what the Freedom to Vote Act does. It puts the fire out. But then we've also got to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. That's about building a fire station for future fires. And what do I mean by that? That means that there are states, including Georgia, that have a long history of voter suppression. And so those states historically have been under the administration of something called pre-clearance. That is to say that before they make significant changes in the way they conduct their elections, those changes have to be pre-cleared by the Justice Department. We no longer have that tool, and that's why you're seeing these voter suppression tactics all across the country, because we don't have the protections that we had just a few years ago, and our work is to pass both of these bills.
So now, I guess we have to get to the meat of the matter, and that is our panelists, because they have a lot of questions for you, and we want to provide our audience with information so they will know how to get in touch with their legislators, their senators, and tell them why these two acts are so important. So thank you, Senator Warnock. Now our panelists have questions, and we'll begin with Dr. Jeffries Leonard. Dr. Leonard.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Senator Warnock, it's so very good to be here with you this evening. So we know losing ground on our civil rights is not an option. And I know, as you know, there's some questions that we'd love to hear you answer. So first of all, tell us how you define civil rights.
Oh, civil rights is about the commitment that we have, the covenant we have with one another as an American people, that says that there's certain inalienable rights that we believe have to do with being a human being in the world, but we codify those things in law in the United States of America in such a way that we protect the dignity of every human being. Mm-hmm. And so all of those rights, whether we're talking about the right to fair housing, or the right not to be discriminated against as you apply for a job, or the right not to be discriminated against on the basis of race, gender, sexual orientation, class, All of those things are protected. They are preserved by the right to vote. Voting rights are preservative of all other rights. Is how we protect all of these things, and that's why the vote is so very precious.
Thank you. It is so very, very precious. But tell us, in addition to voting, outside of voting, what can we do to have a voice on current civil rights issues?
Well, in a real sense, I think the National Coalition of 100 Black Women has been at the front lines of that fight, and I just want to encourage you tonight to continue that fight. Listen, we go and we vote for people to represent us in government, but let's be very clear. You don't outsource your voice to anybody, including the people you vote for. Democracy is too precious. It is a team sport. It is a collective project, and it requires all of us to stay engaged. So never outsource your voice. When you vote, continue to hold the people, even those you voted for, whether you voted for them or not. If they hail from your city, your state, they represent you. So hold their feet to the fire. I've been in office now, I guess, 11 months, 10 months, and we've already answered 240,000 pieces of constituent mail. I'd like to tell you that I answered all of those myself, but you know, there are intelligent folk on this call. We've got a great team, but we try to be responsive to questions, and in the places where we can be helpful to folks, we do that. But always hold the folks that you elect, or whether you voted for them or not, the folks who represent you, hold them accountable. Call them. Politicians count. We know that behind every call, there are a whole lot of other folk who didn't call. And then if we get a letter, we take that very seriously. We know that behind every letter, there are at least dozens of others who didn't write a letter. So stay engaged, show up. It makes a difference.
You know, the Links Incorporated we've been very vocal about the fact that our voice is our vote, which is our power. And so I appreciate hearing you say that. So my last question before I bring on our attorney, Janice Mathis, is what can we do as citizens to ensure that we never have such divisive politics as we did in 2020?
Well, I mean, I'd like to tell you that we'll never have to deal with that again, but I mean, it's just that. We have to stay engaged. We have to remain vigilant. And we have to insist even when others would be ugly. You know, as Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. And I'll tell you that that's what I did during my campaign. And I think I demonstrated, my incredible team demonstrated that you can take the high moral ground and win. You remember that my opponent and those who wanted this seat, and it's, you know, in the most expensive set of Senate races in American history, they threw all kinds of things at us, trying to appeal to people's nativistic impulses, appeal to people's fear of whomever they perceive to be the other. And through all of it, we tried to operate in my authentic voice. We held on to our integrity. We took the high ground. And I thought that during the midst of a pandemic, the last thing people needed was a whole bunch of negative ads. And so we spoke to the moment, and we had a little humor along the way. I often say that I walked a dog into the United States Senate, and we intend to continue to operate in a way that brings dignity to the work that we are trying to do.
Senator,
Kimberly, could you introduce our next guest?
Yes, I would be glad to do that. We're going to continue this conversation on losing ground on our civil rights is not an option with attorney Janice Mathis. Janice.
Good evening. And thank you to the organizers of this important subject program tonight. And thank you to my good friend, the wonderful senator from Georgia, who has made us all so very proud. And thank you for your courage and your tenacity in actually crafting the Freedom to Vote Act when the For the People Act got stalled by politics. I do have a couple of questions for you. And we want to know, what is our most important civil right?
Our most important civil right? That's an interesting question. Janice, it's great to be here with you. We've worked together over the years. And, you know, when I think of you, of course, I think of the Reverend Jesse Jackson and our work with him. And we continue to pray for him in this season of his life. I think all of our civil rights, Janice, are inextricably connected. And you know, I don't know that I would single one out. I think voting rights are preservative of all other rights. Voting rights is the way we get to fight for all of the other things we care about. You know, I often say to the folks who are focused on climate change and who are focused on environmental degradation, in a movement that for a very long time was largely white and middle class, that you all need to be talking more about civil rights. But then I say to the civil rights folk, you need to be much more concerned and much more vocal on this issue of climate change, because what could be a more basic human right than clean water to drink and fresh air to breathe? But climate change is an existential threat, but the way we get to fight for it is we have a democracy. And so voting rights are preservative of all other rights. It's the foundation, it is the framework in which we get to argue and fight for the things that matter. We have to have a democracy. We have to have a democracy. But all of these rights, I think, are inextricably connected. And when you know that if you are a man who's concerned about racism, in order for that to really have moral power, you also got to be concerned about sexism. And if you're concerned about sexism, you also got to be concerned about heterosexism and homophobia. You got to be concerned about classism. You got to be concerned about poverty. Dr. King used to talk about the triplet evils of racism, poverty, and war. He understood the ways in which things are connected. And that also becomes the basis for building a multiracial, multi-faith coalition of conscience that bears witness to the best in us, what Dr. King called beloved community.
Thank you. I agree wholeheartedly. I think the next question is, how can we become more involved? You've done a great job of talking about how all these rights are interconnected. What, as a senator, you're there, you know, one of the most exclusive clubs in the United States, only 100 members, carefully chosen, most of them affluent, all of them influential and powerful. What do you wish constituents would do more of as they fight for civil rights?
Stay engaged, stay engaged, stay engaged. You cannot outsource. Say that again. You cannot outsource your power to anybody else. And so even after you vote for it, stay engaged. And I want you to find ways to build coalitions. Folks, the only way we're going to win this, I like that, the coalition of 100 Black women. I love it that I'm on a call tonight, you know, with the links, with the National Council of Negro Women. Who else is on this call?
Black Women's Roundtable.
Black Women's Agenda. What was that?
Susan Taylor and CARES Mentoring. We've got the crew here tonight.
Everybody's on this call. And this coalition of Black women, and we know Black women have been holding up the world for a long time. And if the rest of the country would go the way of Black women in terms of how you've been voting and showing up, we'd be in an even stronger place. But then we've got to build coalitions across racial lines, and because our democracy is imperiled. The same folks who are trying to make it difficult for Black people to vote aren't just focused on Black people. They're also trying to make it difficult for students to vote. They're trying to make sure that people who are in unions and workers, that their voices are not heard in the same way. And so we've got to build a coalition.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you very much, Reverend. And thank you, Dr. Jeffries Leonard and Attorney Mathis, for continuing the conversation. We have great information we all needed to know, but each of our speakers has 5 minutes for their questions, and I have to be the bad guy tonight and make sure the Baptist preacher doesn't preach too long.
That's a tall order.
And getting to speak to a United States Senator is a
I'm
big
ready.
deal.
I'll just say amen when I have to. Well, next on the program, we're going to talk about the current perspective on civil rights issues. Co-host Gwen Catchings continues our questioning. Gwen, take it away.
And Senator Warnock, hello, it's wonderful to meet you. I just wanted to, first of all, bring you greetings from the Black Women's Agenda and its 24 national collaborating organizations. Earlier today, I listened to Nicole Hannah-Jones from the 1619 Project, and she was talking about Black people being the ones that perfect the Constitution and democracy. And with that in mind, that we are still trying to form this perfect union, that's a real task to do. What can we do to hold local governments accountable and to make sure that things like police brutality is a thing of the past?
Thank you so very much for the question. And I think that that's absolutely right, that when you talk about building a more perfect union, question is, well, how is that work of perfecting the union? How has that happened over time? And it's happened in this way. America, I think of freedom not so much as a destination as much as it's a journey. And on this freedom train, we've been picking up passengers along the way. White sisters and brothers arrived. Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." I think if he could have heard a slave, he would have heard him say, "Me too."
Mm-hmm.
Like folks have had to stand up and say, "Me too." Women have had to stand up and say, "Me too." We've had to build and enlarge our understanding of what this democratic experiment actually looks like. I sit in the United States Senate, the upper chamber, a place where, as Janice has pointed out, it is a very exclusive place. And in its history, there was a time when United States senators were not elected by the people. They were appointed by the state legislature. And they were often, the aristocratic folks who come from wealthy backgrounds, and there's a way in which that still is the case. But we've been trying to enlarge this experiment so that a poor kid who grew up in public housing, one of 12 children in my family, can now serve in the United States Senate. And so that's the work of trying to perfect the democracy, of extending the cords of our grand democratic republic. And Black women have been at the heart of that work and continue to be at the heart of that work. And we have to continue to struggle.
Thank you. But let's pull that thread just a little more and talk about ways that the government, and if there are laws that need to be passed for police brutality. I feel like we've been working at it for so long. And I'm a country girl from Camilla, Georgia. And so even though I live in the Washington area now, I know the fear that people have, the police when I was growing up, and it still does not seem to have changed.
No, absolutely, you're right. That is work that we must continue. I was disappointed that in this Congress, we hadn't found a way yet to pass the George Floyd Act.
Mhm.
It is something that I support, and I think it's outrageous that we didn't that it hasn't gotten done yet. It wasn't that long ago in the summer of 2020 when we saw a multiracial coalition of conscience pouring out into American streets in the wake of Floyd's death. There we were all masked up at dealing with COVID-19, and we saw a Black man literally with his life choked out of him on a New York, not a New York street in this case. I'm thinking about Eric Garner because this is not
Right.
the first time this has happened. And we saw a coalition of conscience pour out into American streets, masked up against one virus, COVID-19, in order to wage war against another virus, COVID-19. And all of these months later, we still haven't passed the George Floyd bill. We have to keep fighting the good fight. And it's legislation that needs to be passed not only at the federal level, but also at the local level and at the state level. And that's what this fight for voting rights is all about. Because if you can dilute the ability of certain people to have their voices heard in a democracy, you can do anything to them. And so let us not lose hope. I know it's frustrating. I've been thinking about this lately because, I've been an activist preacher. I've been an activist for my entire career, and I've gotten arrested more than one time in acts of civil disobedience. And I was thinking the other day that the first time I got arrested in an act of civil disobedience, the year was 1999. And I was a student working on my doctorate at Union Theological Seminary when an African immigrant by the name of Amadou Diallo was on his own property, standing on his own front porch in New York when he was shot dozens of times by the New York police. And I and thousands of New Yorkers, throngs of New Yorkers, went down to one police plaza and offered ourselves up for arrest. And here, that was in 1999, and I looked up last summer, and a whole generation of young adults who don't remember Amadou Diallo, who don't remember Rodney King in 1992, fighting the same fight. In fact, Dr. King said in his 1963 speech, "We will not be satisfied as long as a Negro is the unfortunate victim of the terrible tragedy of police brutality." Dr. King was talking about police brutality in the I Have a Dream speech. We always think only about the end of that speech. He named police brutality by name, called it by name in 1963. So we've been fighting this fight a long time, but we dare not give up. We have to keep fighting the good fight.
Right. There in the 60s back. So that's how far I go back to fighting the good fight. So thank you so much for that. And I think, Monica, would you like for me to go on and introduce Melanie?
Absolutely.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to pass the baton to Melanie Campbell, my sister and my friend. Melanie?
Thank you. Thank you, Gwen, and thank you to the Links and the 100 Black Women, Black Women's Agenda. And it's just an honor to be here with all the sisters and our leader, our brother, fighting the fight in the U.S. Senate, Senator Warnock. I really appreciate the fight. We all do, that you all have inside of that building. We've been outside the building trying to make a little trouble, and we're going to keep doing that.
Thank you for that.
And so the voting rights issue, this voting rights movement, we know is connected to economic justice. So we wanted to ask you tonight, like, what resources are needed to truly identify and close the racial wealth gap, as well as the gender pay gap?
Oh, I mean, that is a multi-pronged struggle. And we certainly need legislation to deal with this issue, the gender pay gap. Black women especially get paid pennies on the dollar as compared to others. And so that's legislation that I continue to stay focused on as a member of the United States Senate, as a member of the Banking Committee. One of the things that I'm trying to do is to deal with affordable housing and to help people with the whole home ownership question. That's one way of dealing with the racial wealth gap. Most people have the lion's share of their wealth in their homes. And there are historic reasons why our home ownership level is not the same as it is for others. And so I'm on legislation right now that does a couple of things. I've got a piece of legislation that provides people down payment assistance in order to get that first home so that they can begin to build wealth, build equity. I'm on another piece of legislation that allows people to gain equity in their home sooner. So we've got to deal. So that's one way of dealing with the racial wealth gap. Another way of dealing with the racial wealth gap is to deal with student loans. I wouldn't be here were it not for Pell Grants and low interest student loans. I often say that I went to Morehouse College on a full faith scholarship. And that means that, yeah, it was, my faith and my own grit and determination that helped. But somebody gave me some low interest student loans. But thankfully, I wasn't as bogged down in student debt as I see a lot of people are. And a whole generation after I graduated from college and more, college debt has now exceeded credit card debt. It's higher than automobile debt. And Black and brown people are disproportionately represented in that space. And so one of the things that we can do in the Congress that would take us a long way with dealing with that racial wealth gap is student debt forgiveness, which is something that I continue to advocate for. You're muted, looks like. Well,
there we go. Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm still in the office, so there's no little background noise. And the other thing I did want to thank you all for is fighting for on this all Build Back Better.
Yes.
We know you got some of it done, so hopefully some of that'll help us close the racial and gender gap with the infrastructure and all that with $1 trillion plus. So thank you for that. I know you're fighting for the other part. My last question is, how can local officials work together to ensure that smaller community issues and concerns get heard and have access to resources they may not know are available?
How can you mean elected officials?
Yeah, how can local officials do more to work together?
There's no limit to what we can do as long as we don't mind who gets the credit.
Yeah.
So hold them accountable and insist that folks deliver for people who are not necessarily the well-connected and the folks with the deepest pockets. And you know what? Some of the folks who are on this call ought to run for office. If you don't like the representation you have, why don't you run and get in the arena, get in the fight?
Thank you, Senator Warnock. We're gonna all keep getting that, as John Lewis said, good trouble. And I'm a old Ebenezer member, just so you know, under Reverend Dr. Roberts.
Yes.
So good.
God bless you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Sister Pearson.
Thank you. And I guess I have to ask you, Senator Warnock, when she was talking about that gap, how do we cover it in cities like right around Ebenezer? The property is getting so expensive that the old folks who live there can't afford to pay the taxes. They're literally being moved out of their homes for lack of the ability to pay a bill.
Yeah, there's no question that this issue around affordable housing is a very serious issue. And as a member of the Banking Committee, which is also Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, too often under the administration of the other party, that committee has been focused on doing what the banks need. We've been very focused under our chairman, Sherrod Brown of Ohio. We've been very focused on housing and trying to make sure we do that we put forward policy that deals with this issue of affordable housing. And I'm chair of financial institutions and consumer protection. And so we are trying to put forward all the tools that we can manage to pull together in order to address this very issue that you point out.
Thank you. And thank you, President Catchings-Hess and President Campbell. Now, we are learning an awful lot tonight, but how much are we retaining? To find out, we're going to pause for the cause and play the Jeopardy game. Now, remember, so much is in jeopardy if the For the People Act isn't passed. Bridget Baker, it's on you.
Thank you, and welcome to our Jeopardy game. All right, I invite you to play along by putting your answers in the chat. And if you're joining us via Facebook, you can also put your answers in the comments. So good luck. For round one, our first question is, what are some ways voter rights are being challenged? Is it A, restrictions on voting by mail? B, lack of access to polling locations? C, limiting early voting hours? Is it D, A, and C, or E, none of the above? So try your hand at the right answer. I'll give you just a couple seconds. All right, I see folks entering in the chat. And the correct answer is D, A and C, both restrictions on voting by mail as well as limited early voting hours. Let's move on to round two. The question is, what is the For the People Act? Is it A, bill that expands Americans' access to the ballot box? B, a bill that reduces the influence of big money in politics? C, a bill that strengthens ethics rules for public servants? D, a bill that implements anti-corruption measures for the purpose of fortifying our democracy? Or E, all of the above? All right, so I'm waiting to see your answers. And the correct answer is E, all of the above. All right, for round three, again, waiting to see if you're getting any of these right. The question is, what can citizens do to build a relationship with their local government officials, i.e. town halls, forums, etc., prior to re-election time? Is it A, organizing protests outside City Hall in order to speak with requested officials? B, organizing positive position papers, letters, focus groups, online surveys, and public meetings about public concerns to submit to local office? Is it C, calling City Hall in order to speak with requested officials? D, begin volunteering with city lead organizations in order to network? Or E, all of the above? All right, and the correct answer is actually B, organizing position papers, letters, focus groups, online surveys, and public meetings about public concerns to submit to your local office. All right, going into our round four, the question is, how can we ensure our voice is heard through our vote if our rights to vote are being challenged? Is it A, stay active on social media? If there's any concern, you can always rally support via social media. Is it B, making sure that we are correctly registered to vote prior to election season? Is it C, make sure your family and friends vote the same way you do? Is it D, A, and C, or E, none of the above? And I see all the answers rolling in, but the correct answer is B, making sure that we are correctly registered to vote prior to election season. All right, our final question for round five is, what can we as a community do to help encourage voter participation? Is it A, start a social media campaign to spread awareness of why voting is important? B, work with local organizations and schools to make sure that the next generation is educated on why voting is important. C, start a community-driven effort to make sure all of your neighbors are properly registered and know who the candidates are. D, volunteer with a local voter education organization and help spread information. Or E, all of the above. And the correct answer is all of the above. How many did you get right? Tell us in the chat and on the Facebook comments. That concludes our rounds of Jeopardy! I now turn it back over to Monica Kaufman-Pearson for our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Bridget. That was fun. Now back to business. We will conclude with questions from the esteemed Susan L. Taylor, followed by Leslie Hill. This conversation will focus on the cooperative stance on securing our civil rights. Susan, we'll start with you. While Susan is
Here we
getting
are.
ready. There you are, Susan.
I have been ready. Lord have mercy. I was saying I'm so proud to be here and absolutely so proud of you, Senator Warnock. So let me just say that I am not at home. We're taking care of my husband's elderly parents and I'm doing my best to set it up in their bedroom. It's not easy out here, but let me get to the point of why we are here tonight. I'm trying to get right here in the center. Okay, taking a cooperative stance, standing together. We know how important it is to preserve our civil rights and to find a way to enjoy the equities of democracy that are still, not outside of our reach, but still we don't enjoy. What would you say, Senator, to Black people? What would you have us do that would ensure our civil rights?
Well, thank you so much, Susan. It's great to see you. Great to be here with all of you. You've been in the fight in so many ways for so long, and I'm grateful for your voice. And that's just the thing. We have to continue to lift our voice. We have made a difference in this country. And while representation is not everything, representation does matter. I think there's so much happening right now. The challenges are so great that there's the temptation to give in to cynicism and despair. But I want you to think about this. When it looked like on November 4th that Joe Biden would indeed be the president of the United States, it took a couple of days for us to be absolutely sure, but when it looked on November 4th that he would be the president, who would have thought that the balance of power in the Senate, which is so important, would still be unresolved, and that you would need 2 seats to determine who would have the power? And what are the chances that both of those seats would be in the same state? And if somebody said, look, to my party, to the Democrats, you get the majority, but you have to solve the riddle. You get to pick the state. Who in the world would pick Georgia? And yet that's what happened on January 5th. Georgia elected its first Black senator. And when I say I'm the first Black senator from Georgia, we need to put that in perspective. We shouldn't say it like, states in the North and other places have been inundated with Black senators. Still waiting on New York to elect a Black senator. I'm only number 11 in the whole history of the country. But Georgia elected its first Black senator, its only Black Democrat ever elected from the South. And we elected our first Jewish senator, my brother John Ossoff. So every now and then, God gives us a glimpse of what's possible. Now, I was elected on January 5th. We know what happened on January 6th. A violent assault on the nation unlike anything we've seen. And so I say that our country lives in that tension. It lives in that dialectical space between January 5th and January 6th. between our hopes and our fears, between the ideals of a democratic republic, one person, one vote, where a kid who grew up in public housing, one of 12 children, first college graduate in his family, can become a United States senator. That's an important part of our story. That's America. But what happened on January 6th is a part of our complicated American story also. And to say otherwise is not to tell the whole truth. And the challenge, the vocation that is in front of us is that same challenge that's confronted every generation of Americans. Are we going to push the country closer to the hope and possibility of January 5th, where a Black man, a Jewish person, Jewish man, can get elected to the US Senate on the same night? Or are we going to give in to the fear, the xenophobia, the bigotry, those who divide us because folk who have no vision engage in division? And I'm always clear as a person, as a pastor who leads a largely, but not completely or exclusively, but largely Black Baptist church. We don't get very far without the sisters. And so thank you all for being with me in this fight.
Oh, Reverend Senator, you really are an inspirer. You give us hope. I'm worried about the children. You know, you said that it was shocking that young people had not heard of Amadou Diallo and so much more. As I said, I'm out here and taking care of a 96-year-old father in love, I call him. Tuskegee Airman, don't say former, he'll be mad at you.
Right.
But you know, you hear the history, and the history has lived in my life because of my parents. But so many of our young people today don't have that benefit. They're not learning it in school, and their parents may be ignorant to the history or too busy to talk about it. There are many reasons. How do we ensure that today's young people who are not learning the history in school and who may not be getting it at home, how do we ensure that they understand that this is really a fight for democracy that we must win?
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And let me just say that my team just handed me a note. There's a vote at 8:15. I'm on the other side of town. I thought I was done for the night, but I got to get back to the chamber to vote, which is a good thing. Again, you know, I still wake up, as difficult as this work is, I wake up every day, pinch myself, because I can't believe I get to fight in this way. I've been engaged in trying to do the best I can for us my whole career. But that I get to represent the people of the state of Georgia in the Senate is quite an honor. Let me say, Susan, you know, it's interesting that I pastor Ebenezer Baptist Church where Dr. King preached and served. And I'm part of that generation that remembers we were kids when the fight to make Dr. King's birthday a holiday, when that fight was going on, when Mrs. King and others were trying to make the King holiday a reality. I was in grade school, and I believe Ronald Reagan signed it into law in 1986, somewhere in there. But in the years prior to that, when I was in 6th grade, 7th grade, Black mamas pulled their kids out of school on January 15th before they made it a holiday. And they had these teach-ins. Some of them were at our churches. Some of them, in my case, was at the local May Street YMCA. And they kept us in the Y all day, and they showed us an old film called Eyes on the Prize. Yeah. And that was my introduction to Martin Luther King Jr. He was also the man that was on the fan on Sunday mornings. You know what I'm talking about? If you went to and they taught us those lessons. And I think that we can do no less now. Whether you're in the car taking the kids on the way to school, you ought to be teaching the lesson. But then you also need to be engaged in your school and insist that our children, not just Black children, all of our children learn Black history, because Black history is American history.
Oh, thank you so much. You're so right. But before, and we know you have to run, but before you do, we want to introduce Leslie Hill from Sumatra Life Insurance Company, who has a couple of questions for you. So, Leslie, you may have to pare it down to just one. Thank you, Senator.
They telling me I can answer one question. So Leslie, give it to me quickly. I've got to go vote.
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you so much, Ms. Taylor, and thank you, Senator Warnock. It's an honor to represent Sumatra and participate in this conversation. My question for you is, how can we make sure that our government officials have the people's best interests at heart when balancing contemporary social and economic issues with political realities?
We've got to stay engaged. I mean, what I've been saying tonight, and thank you for the question. We have to remember that it's not up to them. It's up to us. And we can make a difference. And whenever you doubt it, I mean, you're looking at an example of what can happen when we build the kind of necessary coalitions to do the work. I got to run, folks, but I'm deeply honored. It was great to be here with the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, all the organizations on the call. We've got an election next year. And I know that with you, we win again. Thanks so much, everybody. Keep the faith.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator, and go vote. Well, that was great. I hope you learned a lot from just listening to the senator tonight. I know I did. So that brings us to the end. I can say thank you to Senator Warnock, to Susan and Leslie for closing us out with at least one question from Leslie. And I think that was the most important question of the evening. How can we get involved and why we need to stay involved? And look at him as an example of what can happen when we vote and when we become involved in politics rather than just sitting on the sideline. I also like the fact that he said there's some people on this call and on this viewing right now who could run for office. Now, don't ask me, I got too many ex-husbands, so let's not do that. Okay, we are having important conversations this evening, and thanks to all of our interviewers for doing it. So now it's time to turn it back over to end our program tonight to the former immediate past president of the NCBW, my buddy, Virginia Harris. Virginia, it's been a wonderful program, and thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you, Monica. And wow, what a truly amazing discussion. As we come to a close, I want to thank our wonderful moderator, our dear friend, Monica Kaufman-Pearson, and my fellow host committee, Dr. Kimberly Jeffrey Leonard, National President of the Links Incorporated, and Gwen Katchen-Hess, Black Women Agenda. To our engaging panelists, Attorney Janice Matthews, Executive Director of the National Council of Negro Women. Your direction and insight really helped to lead the discussion. And Melanie Campbell, President and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. Our friend and partner, Susan L. Taylor, founder of and CEO, National Cares and Mentoring. And Leslie Hill, Manager, Public Affairs, Symmetric Life Insurance Company. Thank you for continuing the conversation and inciting some very thought-provoking questions. And a special thanks to my pastor and senator, Raphael G. Warnock. It is so critical that government continues to communicate and work with community prior to election time. And I am grateful that you are here with us today. As the people, our voice is stronger when we raise it together. Let us take advantage of our civil rights and continue to use our voice and our vote. And I wish you well and a good night. Thank you.